Welcome to the show. IB Nation Sports Talk is up and rolling. Great to have you with us today. It's very spirited, I see already in the YouTube chat room. We've got Bobby Hensley back in the house. It's been a while since we've been together.
Well, you left me for a week with Vince, and we had a blast. And then I couldn't. I wanted Vince again. It was you last week, so I had to step out. I wasn't ready for you yet.
You couldn't get over it. You couldn't have me coming back too soon. Were you at the? Did you go? I didn't even ask. Did you go to the NASCAR race last week in Michigan? Is that where you were?
Yeah, the last 2 weekends I went to Indy and Michigan for NASCAR.
Oh wow!
I remember part of it.
Yeah, I bet. You look like you get a little sun on your face there. Anyway, so always good to be back with you, of course, even, whether we lie about it or not. I saw Tommy Guns 44. I was scrolling through some of the chat stuff. He said he was in Nashville for Tuesday's show. He was in Waco yesterday, and he's going to be in Des Moines tonight, or he's in Des Moines tonight for about 6 hours. So Tommy Guns making it a cross-country affair this week, listening to IB Nation Sports Talk. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, you're old, so I know the internet's kind of tough for you, but you can watch from anywhere.
I know you don't watch Better Call Saul, but there was, an Ask Jeeves reference on the show this week. That, that kind of tells you, like, speaking of the internet and your friend and dated and all that kind of good stuff. Carol Burnett with a guest appearance in these last few episodes. Only one more episode to go, so kind of going to get misty about that next week. But before we go any further, don't forget, hit the like button if you would, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. This is the place to be with just 23 days to go until Notre Dame and Ohio State kick off the season. September.
Then we have real content.
Well, we've got real content right now. We've had real content all week, and Brian didn't do a show earlier today, so this is the Irish Breakdown show of the day. So glad to have you with us. Mays AK, will Saul get caught? We don't want too many spoilers. Now, but I'm going back and forth on this. I don't think he's going to get caught. I don't think he will. That's just my personal opinion, but that's based on kind of like how the show ended with a little teaser at the end of last week.
All right, one quick question about this show. Is it better than Breaking Bad, or is it on par with it even? Because I haven't watched either.
It's definitely on par. It's different. There are some people who say that Better Call Saul exceeded Breaking Bad. It's there are obviously similarities with characters and kind of the way some plots have gone and stuff like that, but it's different enough that, they're, depending on what style of show you like, you could definitely say it's better. I don't know that it's better. To me, they're two really, really good shows, done by basically the same people, Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould. So
yeah, I'd rather watch Lost, but that's just me.
I mean, we can always do a Lost rewatch as well. So had a little bit of Notre Dame football practice this morning, not a lot. It was one of those 5-period practices, which is, it's pretty much 99% position drills when we go to the 5-period practices. One detail that stands out to me a week into Marcus Freeman's first training camp, this should come as no surprise, but the guy just spends so much time, like during the stretching part at the beginning, going through, walking around, talking to players, chatting it up, shaking hands with the players before they come on the field, that kind of stuff. It's a pretty stark contrast from a guy who used to fold his arms a lot and just kind of stand around, I guess,
Yeah.
Yeah,
you just got the crossed arms look.
That's the pose right there. There.
The clipboard guy. No, practice is a weird thing because you go through position drills, but even like at a combine, you're looking at guys that are running 40-yard dashes, but it's way different in game speed with pads on than it would be, on the field. It's interesting because like the whole Tyreek Hill and Usain Bolt had that back and forth on who was quicker there for a while. And it's way different with pads on versus just running straight speed, but So like how much can you actually learn from drills and just watching? It's just you're so ready for the season to start that it's something to watch and it's something.
Yep. That's it. We've got a big full practice coming up next week, and that'll be our last full practice viewing opportunity. So we'll get a chance to see a full one next week, and then that's going to be it before the season starts. So that'll be our really last chance, to make any real, draw any real conclusions and that kind of stuff. I hope we're going to get to see some live things, but just kind of a quick, here's some things that I saw today.
Observations.
Saw some guys taking punts off the jugs gun. Chris Tyree, Jabron Payne, Matt Salerno, Jade Mickey, Brandon Joseph, all back there, and again, they're just basically practicing, they put the ball in the machine, they shoot it out, just practicing making the catches, so no returns or anything like that, nothing beyond that to see. Watch the quarterbacks throw a lot of short passes. Tyler Buckner, breaking news, still has the same throwing mechanics. Speaking of spoilers, still has the same throwing mechanics that he did last week and a week earlier as well. But he's still consistently hitting the targets as well. So, I know a lot of people are, up in arms about the throwing motion and all that kind of stuff right now. That'll only become a story if, he is inaccurate during the season. I think that some of his issues last year had more to do with the fact that he was basically just a package quarterback and not, going through, full practice type situations for a lot of things, in the season, because it was basically just whatever his package was.
Right. And then there's also something that he's running for his life last year, trying to avoid himself and getting some of that. And, a good line makes an okay quarterback really good, and a really good quarterback makes an okay line look really good. So, like, what you're looking at, the mechanics. Does anybody I know that there's a certain way to throw a ball, but obviously he's gotten this far. He got recruited. He's going to be in a team that's already going to be considered for the playoffs. So obviously he's good enough to be recruited by them and be put in the position. So the mechanics aren't necessarily important because you can't change them. 23 days, you said. There's no way you can change them the next 23 days. So what I think you need to look for is a way that they can not package, but like just make him more viable, make him more useful.
Yeah. And DT Roll Hunt. I still don't know how to say this. DT Roll Hunter. I don't know. Every throw recorded today was in the chest. That would be accurate based on what we saw. There was a Deion Colsey drop, on one of the passes, so, like if you're charting completions and incompletions and all that kind of stuff, but again, he's looked really accurate so far, regardless of what you want to say about, his maybe not completely orthodox delivery. Running backs, they did the gauntlet drill. That's the thing where they, they run through the padded thing with the arms on it and all that stuff against some resistance. Walk-on running back Sam Asaf, who has about the same build as Vince Vaughn from the movie Rudy. You remember, the running back. Sam got stuck in the gauntlet once, and he had to kind of back his way out, and then all his running back teammates were going, lower your shoulder, lower your pad level, Sam. And then he got through when he dropped his shoulders and got through it. So that
is going to be the most embarrassing moment of this training camp, isn't it? Or the spring, or whatever you want to call it, the practice leading up to this, a guy getting stuck in a drill.
Yeah.
Yikes. That's why he's a walk-on.
Mm-hmm. Well, a few years ago, Cam McDaniel went through the gauntlet backwards, and that became an issue. So
yeah, but he was the most beautiful man on the history of Notre Dame's program.
That's true. Everyone thinks about that, what looks like a pose with his helmet off. That's right. And then after practice, we got to talk with offensive line coach Harry Hiestand and Jarrett Patterson and Josh Lugg. No surprise, Hiestand kept the linemen on the field for about an extra 15 minutes after practice, going over, more detail and technique and all that kind of stuff. And then we got to talk to Harry for about 7.5 minutes by the time he came in for the media. So he kept the team on the field for about twice as much time as we actually got to talk to him afterwards. But I've got Harry Hiestand notebook coming out. He shared a lot of thoughts about a lot of his different pupils. So you'll be able to find that at Irish Breakdown here in the very near future. I don't think it's
offensive
up
line
yet.
Offensive line, one of those positions that like everybody, it's not a sexy position that people, I mean, they call it unskilled kind of, but it's just, it's one of the most important positions because on the NFL team, the second highest paid guy is always the left tackle on the offense. You protect your quarterback. And it's always fun to see actually those guys get kind of talked about and hopefully it's better than last year. At least it's more positive vibe right now about the offensive line than it was at this time last year.
Yeah. USMA 87, HH a little testy too. He was a little like he wanted to get going. He had no time for it. It's like, I'm here to coach football. I'm here to coach this offensive line. I don't have time for any of this. But one thing Jarrett Patterson was talking about was like, the difference having Harry Hiestand. He didn't get to play for him in the spring. Patterson didn't because of his injury, but he was talking about how they are, just the difference in technique, like regardless of if it's a 1-yard run or a 99-yard run, if you don't get the technique right, Harry Hiestand is going to be on you. That is number one. But also they talked about during their position stuff, how much live stuff they're doing to get them ready. Like they're going to practice at game tempo is what they're talking about. So like they were practicing combo blocks today, and what they were talking about is the average play lasts about 5 seconds. So they were doing it like 5 seconds. You do this combo block, 2 guys on 1, 5 seconds, full speed with the defensive, whoever the defensive line guy is coming at them, full speed. And, then it's like, okay, next guy's in, you're going to go full speed, so they're talking, he was talking about how much more intense it is under Harry Hiestand than Jeff Quinn, just in terms of what they're doing in their position drills. So a lot of really encouraging things already, even if we didn't get to hear a lot of it from Harry, at least we were imparted that wisdom from Jarrett Patterson, who's making that move from center to left guard this season.
Yeah. I mean, you got a non-BS guy there is what you got. He wants you to hit the ground running, and he wants game speed. He wants you to be ready, which you got to respect that. I mean, it's got to be only good things for a group that, I mean, you can go technique all you want, and you can, try to go slow, but like if you're not doing it, you're not going to get better at it. And the more reps and the more that they work at it, I think and then the fact he might have been a little short after, but I mean, he's an offensive line guy, so he's not used to his moment in the sun. And I think that, that's a good look for him. I mean, you want a gritty guy there.
That's exactly right. Drunk Vigo. I don't know what exactly this means. Sean Stiers with a big voice. Okay, I'll take that.
You're taking it as a compliment, so we're gonna start that one.
Right. That's right. Big story of the week is the Big Ten approaching, finalizing its new TV contracts with CBS, NBC, and Fox. And what that means, they were already with Fox, obviously, but the CBS and NBC parts of this are very new. And so what that means is that after a 40-year relationship between ESPN and the Big Ten will no longer be televised by the mothership when this deal is done. John Oran of the Sports Business Journal was the first to report that ESPN had officially pulled out of the Big Ten negotiations after saying no to the conference's final offer of a 7-year deal worth $380 million per year. And so where it is, both NBC and CBS are going to reportedly pay $350 million a year to televise those Big Ten games. So here's what a typical Saturday will look like once all parties are involved.
For the Big Ten perspective.
Yes, for the Big Ten. This is what like a Big Ten is, what a Saturday is going to look like for the Big Ten. At noon, you're going to have the Big Noon Kickoff on Fox. That's typically their feature game. At 3:30 Eastern time, there's going to be a Big Ten game on CBS, and then there's going to be a primetime game on NBC. So 3 networks and 3 different Big Ten games on Saturday. ESPN is predominantly going to be in the SEC business, although there is still, are still TV contracts to be done. That they're going to have ACC football as well, and the Pac-12 and Big 12 are still possibilities out there. And I would imagine that they will try to add at least one, if not both, of them in the future after losing out. They gain the SEC, but they lose the Big Ten. But the Big Ten's also still working on a streaming package, so there could be some streaming coming. Eric Pruitt said 350 each or all together. No, that is each. Both CBS and NBC are each going to pay $350 million
and Fox as well
per year. And yes, well, I think Fox might be a little bit less, but still, all three.
Yeah, right. Each.
And that's why you're right around $1 billion a year, and that's why there's all these talks about $100 million payouts per Big Ten school because of the fact that you're talking about $1 billion per year in the whole rights package. So I guess to start off with, ESPN's 10-year deal with the SEC is going to start not next year, but the year after, and it's going to be in the $300 million range. So we're going to get to the Notre Dame side of this here in just a minute, but Bobby, just kind of your thoughts on all this. First of all, with this big move, we've been anticipating something. NBC kind of jumped in here late, and now NBC has decided that they're in the Big Ten football business.
Well, NBC kind of, and we'll get into the Notre Dame stuff, but they were kind of the independent, right? They were tied to Notre Dame, so if they wanted to get in, they're going to have to pay for it. And you say how long these TV contracts are going to go for, or do you just know that it's the 350?
Yeah, that I'm not sure of the length yet. There's only so much stuff that's being, we'll find out all that when everything is finalized and everything.
But it's just wild to me because I think in college football 5 years ago, you never would have saw any of this coming. So why I don't understand these big contracts when you don't like the streaming stuff. Everything's going to end up on an app or a subscription, I should say. You're going to get the Big Ten, or you can get whatever, or you can pay per game. Who knows where it's going? But the fact that you're putting so much money all together is just absolutely crazy. And you're looking at a Saturday where they're going to strategically place their games out. And I'm sure that ESPN and the SEC will look at their matchups and try to go against them. And Notre Dame obviously is a wild card in there, but that is just so much money. And I guess it's good that everybody has a piece of the pie, but if you want to talk about NBC having a primetime game and you think it's going to be Northwestern versus Rutgers, I have a hard time believing that big noon kickoff, especially if Fox is paying a little bit less than NBC or CBS. I just have a hard time seeing the future of this not going towards, again, primetime on a Saturday and having the main game in there. Outside of that, it's wild that I don't know how they're going to do their portfolio with all three networks. Once it becomes something that's just a streaming or a subscription-based thing, I wonder how that'll all tie together. Yeah. But right now, obviously the NFL, they're driving the cart. They have the most money. But football is what has everyone's attention, and college football is a really close number 2 to the NFL in terms of money. So every network has to have a piece of it. And the way they broke it down, we talked about conference realignment. You have the SEC and you have the Big Ten. You have to either get a part of it or you're going to be left out, and then you can't get in the game.
Yeah, and now all three of the major networks, or three of the four major networks, obviously ABC being affiliated with ESPN, 3 of the 4 have a direct affiliation now with the Big Ten. So,
there's not enough to pick off of, though.
Yeah. One question that Josh asked in the YouTube chat, how does that affect Notre Dame home games that's on primetime also? I mean, that's yet to be determined. One, Notre Dame and NBC have to come to an extension, a renewal of their contract, and that's what we're going to talk about here in a second. But that's to be, that would obviously have to be figured out, but one of the things that, remember that CBSsports.com story that came out 2 or 3 weeks ago was about Notre Dame needing $75 million per year, in order to get what they would get from a TV rights deal in order to keep their independence. And, one of the things that was mentioned in there is how NBC was looking for quote unquote shoulder programming to go along with Notre Dame football. They didn't just want to be in the Notre Dame football business. For them to make having Notre Dame more valuable, they needed something like this. And now they have that something like this. It's going to cost them $350 million a year. But again, we're going to get to the Notre Dame piece in a second. One little detail, the Big Ten's new deal with CBS is going to start next year. That's also the last year on the deal with the SEC. So there's going to be some overlap there that CBS is going to have to figure out. You know, like we're talking about how Notre Dame and Big Ten in these primetime games get figured out. But that's going to be something that CBS is going to have to figure out next year.
Unless they do some sort of trade, who knows the way everything goes. Like, in the NFL, oh, we can give you Aikman from Fox if we get the Ohio State Notre Dame game. Everything's up in the air, and who knows where it's going to go. It's really interesting that the Big Ten is going to be on so many networks. I just don't think there's enough there. I know they're adding USC and UCLA.
Yeah, are there really 3 Big Ten games a week that are worth watching?
No,
that on national TV like that, because it's one thing to have, like a low level like Maryland Rutgers or Maryland Iowa or whoever on ESPN at noon. Those are usually the games when we're driving over to the stadium. That's the game that's on when you get there, and it's like, okay, a little warm up for the day. It's one thing to have those kind of games, but are there really 3 nationally televised games worth viewing in Big Ten football per week? I agree with what you're saying. I mean, they're really, about 4 programs worth watching, maybe 4.5. And that's it.
If that, are you going
to have Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State or Michigan State on every week?
And the turnover in the Big Ten hasn't been big enough. Like I'm saying, like Michigan State might have a good year and Michigan might have a good year. Ohio State's always been a perennially good program for that conference. Even Penn State's been up and down. So the odds that all 4 of them are hot at the same time isn't very high.
Right.
You can add USC and UCLA, who haven't either one of them been up in a while. And then you're going to be, fighting against each other and playing games against each other. So it's going to be harder for one of them to vault up, So I don't think there's enough to pillage out of there to make matchups. And now somebody's going to have to sit down and look at who's supposed to be good. And this matchup can be this week. And then CBS gets this matchup next week. It's just going to be all over the place.
Yeah, I agree with that. So there's already speculation that NBC shelling out $350 million for Big Ten TV rights could signal a push for Notre Dame to join the Big Ten, roll its NBC deal in and join up. And Craig asked, do you think these TV deals force Notre Dame to join a conference? Craig, you read our mind because that was the next question we were going to get to. So what do you think, Bobby? This is, like when USC and UCLA join the Big Ten. Oh, Notre Dame's got to join a conference now. And now NBC has decided they're going to sign up and televise Big Ten games. So it's, Notre Dame's got to join a conference now. So what do you think?
Well, it's just, I wonder who's driving the bus here. Is it NBC or is it Notre Dame? Because Notre Dame needs NBC and NBC needs Notre Dame. Could you ever see a scenario where maybe Notre Dame games are on Peacock and they're going to force you to subscribe to watch them?
I don't think it would come to that. I don't think it would come to where all of them
are,
but
all.
We've already seen a precedent where they're willing to push some games there, though. So
and some of them, and then
Peacock
obviously
can also be used. Like I said, the Big Ten also wants to do a streaming deal. Peacock could also be a part of that.
Right. I think that's a bigger issue. I feel like NBC was their only games are like one bowl game. I can't remember which bowl game it is, and Notre Dame. So if they're kind of joining a conference, I could see Notre Dame maybe being not pushed, not forced, but I think it's looking more lucrative to them. I think it maybe and it depends who they play out a conference and what kind of schedule they're going to be as an independent still.
But again, with Notre Dame, it's not just, okay, we've got to have more money than anybody else with our TV deal. Just the NBC contract that they had displays that, it shows that. And we talked about this a few weeks ago. What is the value of Notre Dame maintaining its independence? It goes beyond whatever the dollar amount is that they're going to get in a TV deal. And like we talked about, the $75 million, is that enough? That was the report that $75 million is the asking price right now. And we've got a super chat from Corey Flynn. Pete Sampson tweets CBS is expected to pay in the $350 million per year neighborhood for the 330 Big Ten games, according to sources. $75 million too low. And that's kind of, we were just talking about that already, that this CBS is going to be locked in with the Big Ten for a 3:30 Eastern time game every week. And yes, their package is going to cost $350 million. And like, if you want to, parse this whole thing out, like with the value and all that kind of stuff, what it comes down to, like NBC getting this Big Ten deal to televise Big Ten games in primetime, that's basically going to alternate between the number 2 and number 3 Big Ten game every week. So NBC is paying $350 million for, on average, what does that come out to? The
Math.
2.5 game per week, like sometimes it's going to be the third best game of the week. Sometimes it's going to be the second best game of the week. But, so if NBC is willing to shell out $350 million a year to get what is half the time going to be the third best Big Ten game of the week, to me, that says that $75 million is too low. That, that there is much more value in Notre Dame's 7 home games. Not all of them are going to be great, but you are going to have Clemson. You're going to have your Ohio States and these kind of games rolling through. You're going to get some higher profile games. I think that they're going to end up with at least $100 million out of this. And the other aspect of this too is, don't forget that it's not just NBC we're talking about, because there's been talk that Fox has the big noon game, but they've got the rest of the day where they can have some inventory. So who's to say that they don't want in the Notre Dame business? And if you get 2 entities bidding against each other, that's just, we've talked about it before. It's just going to drive the price up.
Sure. It's have 2 gas stations on the same intersection. If one's a few cents cheaper, they're going to drive everybody to go there instead. I wonder though, because like you said, you brought it up, and I think the key point in this is scheduling. Notre Dame is kind of guaranteed one marquee matchup a year from the ACC that they selectively pick, kind of. And I think that's where the value is. If it depends who Notre Dame's playing. If they bring back these out-of-conference matchups against big programs, big rivalries, stuff like that, sure. But like this year, do you think UNLV's as a network, do you want to pay all that money when you're going up against a Michigan versus Ohio State game potentially at the same exact time on a different network? So the value of the contract now, the way that it's starting to fall, I almost think you either have to have more marquee matchups, which would help them make the playoff, make it more viable. But I can't see them playing at 2:30 or 3:30 once this contract goes against UNLV.
Who are we talking about? Who are we
Notre
talking
Dame.
about? Okay.
I'm saying Notre Dame playing at 3:30 against UNLV at home. So it's on NBC. And at 3:30 on CBS, they could have a big Big 12 game or Big 10 game for the weekend. So what's the value to NBC at that point when they know that anybody outside of the Notre Dame fandom is going to be watching the other game on the other channel?
But I mean, that issue has already been there when CBS has televised SEC games. There was always a chance that there would be, a better game on another station, but at the same time, again, like when you're looking at the value of what NBC is getting out of this at $350 million for a primetime game, it could be Iowa, Michigan State as your primetime game, for example. No, that's not a bad
nice
game,
little matchup.
But is it really any more attractive than Notre Dame and North Carolina potentially?
I think that's a great example, because those are the games I think that would almost have to become Notre Dame's baseline, though. The way it's gone, you think that Notre Dame Tennessee State game, like, it's a bad look right now to have that on your schedule when you're going into these negotiations.
Yeah, I know.
And you've added MAC opponents, because up until, well, I guess it's been 10 years now, but like Western Michigan, I think, was the first MAC opponent. So it depends what you're scheduling in terms of your independence and what ACC games you have at home. And I think that's more that's gonna matter more. I know what you're saying, that they've already been competing, but I'm saying the gap between the good and the bad in college football is about to be even more of a gap. So at that point, you have to schedule as much of the upper stuff as you can, and that might mean Notre Dame versus Michigan State, or Notre Dame versus, I don't know who else, Oklahoma State or something like that. You're going to have a couple more matchups that aren't those cake up layups. And especially with the way the playoff is, until it expands, you need more of those key wins.
I understand what you're saying week to week, but again, and having some of these less than marquee matchups, definitely, Marshall, UNLV, that's not doing anything for anybody. But at the same time, what those do is help add up to a Notre Dame team that in November, when, sweeps come around and all that stuff, by November, they're in college football playoff contention. So if you do have a Clemson game, or I guess USC would never be in November, at least right now under the current configuration, those kind of games, that it gives those games a little bit more juice if they're in playoff contention at the end of the season, so that's, I think, part of it as well.
It'd be interesting, and you guys in the chat can answer. We see it, but would you rather watch, a Michigan State Iowa matchup, or as a Notre Dame fan, which I assume most of the people are that they're here, would you rather watch Notre Dame versus North Carolina is a good matchup. I wouldn't call that one a toss up, but Notre Dame versus a lesser opponent, because at halftime it's going to be 35-0, or you hope it's 35-0. What up, Toledo game? But, so maybe you watch at the beginning just to see how Notre Dame's going and their quarterback, or their defense, whatever question mark you had for the week. But then at halftime, are you going to come back to that game and watch it, or are you going to stay on the other network and watch a 17-14 Iowa Michigan State game going in the fourth quarter?
Well, but again,
so it really breaks down to what's their fan base, what's the Big Ten fan base, kind of.
Those games on paper can look good going in, but those games have every chance to turn into stinkers as well.
Sure.
The only difference there is their conference games. So if you're in a conference, obviously that means a little more. Another super chat from Corey Flynn. Correction on the previous super chat. Weight of CBS paying $350 million for 13 good Big Ten games. How much would 7 Notre Dame home games be worth? $75 million seems too low to me. Again, a lot to unpack. And that's, again, I said it. I think Notre Dame is in really good shape to get north of $100 million now from NBC, because, I'll read Jack Swarbrick. I don't know if you saw these quotes from Jack Swarbrick. He did a live chat via Notre Dame last night, and a couple of the things that he said when asked about this thing is, quote, "We need NBC to have more college football, to more effectively promote our games and to talk about our games, and to have NBC be seen in that light." So that was great for us. And so what they're saying is now NBC is moving into the college football business. They've got NFL Sunday Night Football. They've got, their Sunday night NFL show. They've had Notre Dame football, but what that's meant is about every other week they don't have anything. And so now they have a chance to have college football every Saturday. And some Saturdays you're going to have a Big Ten Notre Dame doubleheader. So that is a lot of value. And again, to me, and, like John Orand, kind of listening and seeing some of the stuff that he said as well, $100 million is a pretty good value for NBC if that's what it ends up being, or Fox, or whoever it ends up being. $100 million a year to pay Notre Dame, because of the fact that now you have Notre Dame and you have the Big Ten in there. And who's to say that ESPN might not even, try to get into this sweepstakes as well. One thing John Oran said, and this was interesting to me, because you're talking about the quality of the games, basically. What he was saying, and again, John Oran is from the Sports Business Journal. He was the first one to report all this, just, because I know not everyone follows it. But he was saying, if anything, maybe this gives Notre Dame more incentive, when you're negotiating with NBC or whoever, to now, you're only playing Michigan. What is it, once in 12 or 15 years or whatever it is, to try to get more Michigans and Penn States or Michigan State series back on the schedule, because now if you're NBC, you get that home and home. You can, you potentially get it when it's on the road one year and when it's at Notre Dame the next. And obviously those brand names are more in the ballpark with what you were talking about earlier than with UNLV and, Marshall and Western Michigan and those kind of schools.
We're talking about this and we're allowed to have different opinions, and everybody in the chat is saying pretty much they'd watch the Notre Dame game over, a Big Ten, even if it was a pretty good ranked versus ranked game, which I understand. That's why I asked, just wanted to make sure. But,
Hold on a second. Will, I apologize. I talk with my hands too much. I'm putting my fingers in front of the camera too much and blocking I don't know about distinguished face, but I'll try not to put my hands up so much.
I don't know. When I can't see Sean, that's Bobby, my favorite version of Sean. No, but so this all really depends on, and it's a fantasy thing really at this point, because like I brought it up earlier, but the way everything across the board is changing, it's so hard to say what the right move is. And these networks are taking risks. And now NBC, whether you like it or not, they're gonna keep getting a bigger profile in college football.
Yes.
And that's really what they need. That's what they want.
And again,
so
that's good for Notre Dame. That's good for Notre Dame. So
I was just gonna say, in that Big Ten game, what promo are they gonna run in that break? The Notre Dame matchup coming up after their game. Or like, if Notre Dame is playing North Carolina at 7:30. Yeah, or at they can cross promote, and it's going to work out well for NBC. I think that it strengthens the relationship between NBC and Notre Dame on some level because of that, because there's more places to play it in front of eyeballs that are already in front of that product. So it's not a rallycross race with a Notre Dame promo. It's a Big Ten football game with a Notre Dame promo. And especially once you get through the season and a conference season, there's a lot of eyeballs on that product, and it's only going to help, which should strengthen their value and what they could demand in the free market.
Yeah. And you were talking about NFL and stuff like, like when you look at these windows, because again, it's going to be Fox is going to have the Big Ten game at noon. CBS is going to have the Big Ten game at 3:30, and then NBC has the primetime game. And again, how that affects, like negotiate, basically what Notre Dame has a couple of home primetime games per year. So like if assuming it gets renewed with Notre Dame, I think you can negotiate, and kind of move some things around, so that Notre Dame gets a couple of primetime games as well. But my point is, like, from the Big Ten's perspective, Kevin Warren has an NFL background. And, this is basically the Big Ten is going to have like what an NFL Sunday looks like. You've got 3 windows and multiple networks, and you're going to have your games on all networks across the country because it's all on broadcast TV.
Right. And that's what you want. And that's, I think, we talk about Notre Dame's value and what they should get. Like, I don't know, but what I think the real winner is the fan of college football. There's going to be more football to watch. They're going to pull away more matchups, so they're not all grouped in the evening window. You're going to, like, Fox did a good job pulling the big noon kickoff, and we're going to see where it happens from there. And like, you can have the best matchup on paper and the best schedule, and you still don't know how that season's going to go.
Right.
So when you talk about how much money is being thrown at stuff,
2016,
people are really investing. The networks are really investing a lot of money, hoping that it all turns out good. Oh, there you go. We went from pizza to some bad stuff in the chat. No, but I think that Notre Dame's probably still a viable option as an independent. It'll be interesting too to see if they ever decide to leave the ACC for the Big Ten and kind of the same deal that they have.
Right.
When if we were to talk about this before they joined the ACC, it's 1 foot in or 1 foot out, or 2 feet in or 2. You didn't think they could do both, and they did both. So could they just have that same kind of tie with the Big Ten? So they're not completely in, but they still get all the benefits and they still have their own independence away from it. I think that's another option that should be discussed, at least, because we wouldn't have thought that with the ACC was possible to only have 5 matchups.
I'm tying my hands behind my head so that I don't talk with my hands when I'm talking to you, Bobby. Let's go back to the original question, because I don't know. I'm sure maybe you kind of answered it in there someplace. Do you think that this, NBC getting into the Big Ten business, do you think it makes it more or less likely that Notre Dame is ultimately going to join up with the Big Ten?
I kind of think less likely, because I think that they're still going to have their independence, and they're still going to be able to tie in and use the Big Ten. NBC, this is. NBC's going to be able to use the Big Ten. NBC's going to use Notre Dame's independence. And it works out for them kind of both ways, because like you said, or everybody said in the chat, you're going to watch the Notre Dame game, and then there's going to be a Big Ten game after. And if you haven't switched the channel, then you get hooked in the next game. You're already going to be watching it, or vice versa. You watch the end of the Big Ten, you're watching Notre Dame now.
Right.
So I think that like NBC is going to get the best of both worlds, which is good for Notre Dame to be separate. If Notre Dame joins that conference, now they're just one of the matchups for the week, and they could be on any network, and it doesn't really benefit NBC and the big national audience that Notre Dame is.
Yeah. And, again, I think that it's not just going to be NBC bidding on this. I think the other network, CBS and Fox, I think could both be in play on this. And, you've got a bidding war, and that helps out Notre Dame in that perspective. I think that their first choice would be to stay with NBC. And, because of the fact that they have a 30-year relationship, and I'm not saying this for a fact, but I'm just saying because of that existing relationship and because of how it has worked out over the years, that, they might be willing to even, take, like say Fox bids an extra 10 million or something like that. I wouldn't say that that's a deal breaker probably for NBC because of the way this relationship has existed and worked out over the last.
Look at years. NBC is the only one in this group that in this agreement. Now I'm starting to do the Sean. They're the only ones in this agreement that have a side piece. Notre Dame is that piece, and that's a very powerful piece. Like the Fox, they don't have USC games, or they're Notre Dame. Well, Notre Dame and NBC are the only ones that have something on top of what they already agreed to in the Big Ten. So they might be locked into just these Big Ten matchups on all these other networks, but NBC will still have the availability to put a Notre Dame game on, and some of those matchups, especially a home matchup against the ACC, is going to make NBC even more valuable. Whereas if Notre Dame, as long as Notre Dame's independent, they can still do that.
Right. And, Jack Swarbrick also reiterated last night in that chat the three things that we've talked about before, what Notre Dame needs to maintain its independence, and that is the TV, / media contract, the path to the college football playoff, and a spot for the Olympic sports. And they have, as of right now, they have all three. The TV thing is going to be the first thing that's probably going to be negotiated. And obviously the college football playoff, that's going to, I think it's going to be expanded. We'll find out exactly where that goes, but it would be interesting if, like what made me think of this was the Olympic sports, because right now, obviously the home is the ACC, and they've got this TV contract that runs for another 15 years, as part of that deal.
Except for hockey.
The ACC, just like except which is the Big Ten, obviously. But like if Notre Dame, didn't necessarily join the Big Ten full-fledged, but if either, one of these, like NBC was willing to help buy out that contract and, there's some kind of partial agreement, that is similar with the Big Ten. So now you're scheduling these Big Ten games. And again, it helps everybody out because the NBC's got the Big Ten, and they've got Notre Dame. And then you've potentially got Notre Dame playing more Big Ten teams like they used to, as opposed to all these ACC teams, which really have not done much from a ratings perspective.
No, part of it too, though, depending on the matchup Notre Dame has, you're going to get some viewers that just tune in to watch Notre Dame lose. That's how polarizing that program is. And that's got to matter too, I think, a little bit. Maybe it's not a driving force behind a $100 million contract, but Notre Dame is just so polarizing. Everybody knows them, and everybody knows where Notre Dame is, what they are. And not a lot of programs have that. And I keep going back to that's why they're independent. That's why they've been independent. So you talk about matchups, you talk about their value. It's crazy to me to see they can still play those Big Ten matchups. It's also not saying that they can't play a Michigan again, or someone, or Wisconsin, or whoever, Penn State. So it just continues to prove to me that and I was on the boat earlier that they should join a conference, and now I'm just thinking, why would they? They can already do everything that a conference team can do if they do it right. They have to do it right.
Yeah.
They have to continue to schedule properly, maybe even just an uptick on that. But other than that, they still have that national value. And that's why we can talk about this it's been 45 minutes, because they are Notre Dame. You wouldn't be talking about if Tennessee could be a national brand, or if CBS should just buy the Tennessee Vols games, or if they should join the SEC for only 5 games a year. It's Notre Dame. They're the straw that mixes the drink. They're the ones. When Notre Dame's better, college football is better. Again, for multiple reasons. Most of the pundits on ESPN don't want to talk about Notre Dame because they're SEC bias. But the fact that they want to put down Notre Dame shows that Notre Dame's still relevant, which is a term from, 10 years ago. But just what they still are and what they can still be, there's no reason for them to join a conference. And I think that NBC has positioned themselves in a way that it still makes value for both sides that Notre Dame's independent.
I can tell you haven't talked for 2 weeks, Bobby. It's like you've got all this pent-up aggression. You came in hot. You came in ready to go. You're just firing on all cylinders right now. But
I'm taking that as a compliment.
That's every bit of it's a compliment. But you talked about relevance, and that's something else that Jack Swarbrick talked about in that chat last night when he was asked about conference realignment. Quote, "I don't know if we'll be stronger, but it certainly has felt like a validation of our decision to be independent. When I started this job, all the commentary was, are we relevant? This year, no one's asking that," end quote. And
he's right.
They haven't been asking it for a while, and again, it goes back to, like, not every one of those matchups might be completely sexy for TV. You might get 1 or 2 truly sexy matchups per season, and like even, again, like Notre Dame, North Carolina wasn't necessarily a sexy matchup, even though you had an NFL quarterback, Sam Howell, and Notre Dame and all that stuff, but it sure turned into an exciting game last year, the way the whole thing played out. But yeah, but my point was, again, going to be, like, even though not all these matchups are sexy, the cum effect is you're winning these games, and it puts you into the conversation late in the season where you are at least in the college football playoff conversation. So you're winning those games. It puts you there. And, and again, that helps make some of these late season games potentially at least as attractive, if not more attractive, than some of the counterparts, they're going to end up on some of the other networks.
Well, and that's where Notre Dame, they have the burden to make themselves stay relevant with their matchups and who they schedule. Because how many marquee matchups does Alabama have each year? Maybe 2, Texas A&M and Auburn.
Right.
So you talk about just the SEC blindly, just because they're 8-0, they haven't played a team that's going to have more than 3 wins at the end at that point. You have Tennessee, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, 2 non-conference schmooze fest, and all of a sudden they look like they're an unstoppable program. Notre Dame is the one that can't dip down to that level, because if they take a few weeks for their playing a bye week, which, like playing Wofford or something like Alabama does, those aren't marquee matchups every week either. And that's why those programs have to be part of a conference for the television. Whereas Notre Dame, they're the only ones that can go out on their own and be that program that everybody wants to watch every single week against whatever opponent, because they've been doing a good job of scheduling those opponents. They just got it. I keep going back to that, but that's huge, because like I say, all these other conference teams, for the most part, how many marquee matchups does any other team have? It's less than 5 for sure. Maybe 1 non-conference and 3 good ones in your conference. And other than that, Notre Dame has to have the burden on them every year to put a good schedule together, which they've been doing. And when they have to play their lesser opponents, they're still going to be close to Power 5 opponents, or whatever we're going to call it moving forward, because it won't be Power 5 anymore. Yeah. But it's crazy to me how Notre Dame can still pull this off, and they do it in such a great way, strategic way, that makes them who they are, makes them Notre Dame.
Yep. I still think they're in good shape, and in good shape, I mean, again, they were talking about that $75 million. I think they're in really good shape to potentially get $100 million plus per year.
If they get 100, what's your cut of that?
A big goose egg. I can't talk with my hands, so I got to keep the goose egg back here. Bobby, here's what I know. It's rapid fire time.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready?
Let's try it.
Let's do it. So, do you think the high expectations in year 1 for Notre Dame are good for Marcus Freeman and Tyler Buchner?
Yes. Well, half, I think, for Marcus Freeman, they definitely. I think, of course, they are, because here's the deal. If you don't have high expectations, what are you doing? Are you saying that you want them to have low expectations? So you think your coach isn't great? So you think your quarterback's not going to win? So yes, to that extent, I think it's great to have those high expectations, because it means you're in a spot that preseason people think that you're going to be competitive and you're going to be one of the best teams in the country. I don't see how that's a bad thing. I get what you're going to say and argue that maybe it's too high, so if you don't meet them, it comes crashing down a little bit quicker. But I would rather have high expectations and meet them and look like a program, a dynasty, you're starting something big, versus being like, oh, well, I hope they're 500, and then they win 8 games, and you're like, 8 games? That was a great year. It's Notre Dame. 8 wins is not enough. They need more than 8.
Well, they definitely need more than 8, especially when you've had double-digit wins for 5 years in a row, and you've been in the college football playoffs twice, and you've been in the, just missed on the playoffs a couple of other times, and that's where you are right now. I've always kind of lived by under promise, over deliver, but that's not and Marcus Freeman isn't going out and making any bold statements and promising anything, and neither is Tyler Buchner for that matter. But I think that it is good for him, because that's the place that the program is in right now. And, like when Marcus Freeman is out on the recruiting trail and he's selling Notre Dame to recruits, he's not selling them, well, you come in and we're going to win 8-9 games per year. It's, I'm sure that, it's like, hey, we've been in the college football playoff. We've knocked on the door of the college football playoff. We get you, Mr. 5-star guy. And, we're going to come in and we're going to kick the door down and we're going to be winning college football playoff games. So
you're going to be the difference maker.
Yeah. I think they always want the expectations to be high, whether or not you meet, expectations are always a moving bar no matter what, because right. Just like last year, it seemed like it should have been a transition year. I know I had fairly low expectations. Look what they did. But, again, it's like now you flip it around. The expectations are higher this year. I think the team is definitely going to be better, but you've also got probably a better overall schedule, when you look at the top of the schedule in terms of who you've got to beat if you're going to be a playoff team again.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to – here's another thing. If you have high expectations and they don't meet them this year, let's say they only have 8 wins, everybody's going to be like, well, it's okay. It's his first year. He's still getting his system in place, getting his players in place.
I think there's some of that for both Freeman and Buchner for that.
So that's what I'm saying. So might as well have the high expectations. And if they meet them, then they're solid forever. Whereas if you go in with low and it's like, oh, was that just a fluke year? So I'd rather have the high expectations. You're going to believe you're going to meet them. That's what they're, that's their goal. That's what they're supposed to do. And the expectations that you're talking about aren't like you touched on it. They're not coming in from internal. It's the outside people. It's everyone that's excited about the program, because last year was a down year and look how great that was. Maybe this year could match that. I don't think anybody's calling them the national championship favorites either. So those lofty expectations are to be in the playoff talk, maybe not even make it, but be in that talk towards the end of the year. And that, I think I just like the idea of that being good, because it just shows a solidified program where you're not like peaking and valleying. I think that those aren't verbs, but imagine if they were. But I think what it's showing is that, the peaks and valleys aren't going to be a thing. What it is going to be continued success. And so I like the high expectations, because they're not coming from within. He's not promising anything himself. It's all external, and it's all just going to set them up to be better recruiters and have more success. And I see the positives in having these lofty expectations for this year.
Yeah. Josh says 8 wins would be a disappointment. I completely agree with that. But I mean, this season sets itself
Notre Dame
up
8's not enough. Yeah.
Basically, like, back when your mom was cleaning the applesauce off your beard in 1990, like when Notre Dame would open up against Michigan every year, it's like there's a lot on the table, like right out of the gate. And Vince and I talked about this last week. You win that game or even lose a close game at Ohio State to open up the season, especially if you win that game. I mean, then you talk about high expectations and where things are going to go. But, you even play a really competitive game at Ohio State in that opener. You're a national championship contender right away. There's no room for error, no margin for error after that, but you're going to be a national championship contender right away with one of those two scenarios.
Absolutely. But I've always thought, growing up in South Bend and being, a Notre Dame fan, growing up with them, nobody rises higher in the standings quicker than Notre Dame, but nobody falls as fast as Notre Dame either.
That's true too.
So if you win
even Texas is like a slow trickle when they start losing. It's like people still, with that number one. Who do you think voted? Who do you think gave Texas their only number one vote? By the way, do you think Nick Saban is out there kind of trying to throw some, indirect shade? Like he's out there subtweeting Sarkisian, basically. I'll give you a number one voter. Do you think it's like somebody in the Big 12 trying to throw some? Again, like you talk about expectations, throwing some lofty expectations Texas way.
That question, I think it has to be, who does Texas play first? I don't know who they open up with, but maybe it's that opponent hoping to get, a higher ranked Texas game. I don't know. Obviously, they're not going to be the number one team anytime this year, maybe next year, maybe the year after, but there's no clear answer to why anybody would vote for them to be number one.
I know.
But it is kind of fun. And like you said, it gives talking point. Maybe it is Saban because he likes to mix it up enough. And he does have a connection there.
He does. So in a recent ESPN article, a handful of college football writers came up with some suggested changes for college football. And one of them, start the season with bowl games rather than playing them at the end of the season. The change assumes that, college football is going to have a playoff expansion. So you're going to have it under this scenario, you're going to have an expanded college football playoff. So why bother with bowl games, like lower tier bowl games that nobody's going to watch? Do them as preseason kickoff games around the country instead. You buy or sell that idea?
I buy it in a way because we've talked about it before, but what if you, instead of having those bowl games that are preseason, the bowl games are the spring games? So then you're combining everything. So you have the bowl game against, and it's an exhibition. It's not as important, but you're still getting the reps, the practices. You can make a matchup. You can play the game in a neutral site, and you get rid of the spring games, which are completely useless. So it's combining a little bit of both all into one.
But I guess the question in that scenario would be,
where the seniors play,
what does it count for? Because look at Notre Dame, for example. They had some guys, who were nursing some off-season injuries, and Jarrett Patterson tore a pectoral muscle, so he couldn't play at all in the spring. Those kind of things. I definitely think that at the very least, like a real end of spring scrimmage against another team, there's nothing wrong with that. Or as we've talked about before, playing FCS teams. I don't know if I'd want to play the bowl games there. I'm at least intrigued by, maybe you do. Maybe you play half your bowl games at the start of the season, or something like that instead. I get it that the bowl games at the end of the season, it's like the weather is cold, and most of these places are trying to lure fans to some of these warmer areas and stuff like that, and it's the reward for a 6-6 season in a lot of cases.
5-7.
Yeah, and that's why it's like, why not just play them at the start of the season? Like if you're Kansas State and you're Rutgers, go play someplace in one of these events early in the year someplace. Take your vacation early, and then if you end up being a college football playoff team, which for both of those programs is going to be pretty remote, okay, then you're in your the playoff at the end. I'm intrigued by the thought of doing it this way, flipping it around instead.
I like it because, and at the least I like it preseason, because then, like you said, all these matchups at the end of the year, are you going to watch that Illinois 5-7 program battle? Even if it is like a Raging Cajuns, from Louisiana, you going to watch that game if there's a playoff game next to it? No. So there's no allure to watching any of those bowl games unless you're gambling or you're in a bowl pool or something like that.
True.
So might as well just start the season that way. And they kind of, if you look at it, they've moved that way. They used to have the Eddie Robinson Classic. They used to have the I can't remember what it was
Classic.
Called. Yeah, but a lot of these opponents played neutral sites to start the season. I know Alabama played Michigan one year that in Dallas. And so they're kind of a bowl game feel already. So you might as well just load up the lineup in week 0 or the week before even. And
I would think that there'd be more, even though the weather is warmer, I would think there would be more excitement at the start of the season when you're 0-0 than at the, for fans to pack up and travel and go someplace. Then at the end of the season in December, you're getting ready for the holidays. It's like, we're 6-6. Do I really want to spend the money to go see my 6-6 team play, another 6-6 or 7-5 team play in a bowl game in Nashville or wherever it happens to be? So,
plus at the end of the year, that's why the 5 and 7 programs have started entering bowls. Like you have coaching changes and stuff like that where they're not even going to be playing anyway, or whole programs will just say we don't want to play. So if you don't move it to the beginning of the season, I think it's a dead structure, dead formula. Yeah. You're not going to have bowl games anymore. So you should move them, or at least give yourself a shot to keep them if you enjoy them as a fan, because otherwise they're going away. There's no reason to keep them. And they barely are relevant now at all, even if you want to say relevant. But once you expand the playoff, how less relevant will they be then? You're going to have the Rose Bowl being the 3rd best Big Ten team versus the 3rd best Pac-12 team.
Exactly. Yep. That's part of the point, I think. Fill in the blank. The 2nd annual MLB Field of Dreams game is tonight. This time it's between the Cubs and the Reds. And it's
marquee matchup, must-see TV. What a joke. They already said they wouldn't have the game
your
next
White
year.
Sox and the Yankees last. It was a cool thing last year.
Novelty.
And I didn't even realize this game was going on until earlier this morning. I knew it was kind of supposed to be coming up sometime, and I Googled it, and it's like, oh, it's tonight. And it's like, oh, it's the Cubs and Reds. How badly, again, it's like, how badly do you want to see, 2 bad teams play out in the cornfield? Like last year, it was a novelty. Do we need it every year? We're going to get it every year, but it seems like all it took was 1 year for the novelty to wear off.
No, they already said next year they're not going to do it because they're trying to add more facilities, I think I read. So unless they change their minds, which I guess they can always do, last year was the first time I think a lot of people tuned in to see the game, to see the field, see how it was going to look. And then this year, the matchup's not as good, and we've already seen it. So it's already like a, old hat thing. It's like, oh yeah, I remember what last year. And that's what they're going to talk more about last year's game than this year's.
Craig gave us a super chat. This is going back to what we were just talking about with, moving the bowl games to the front of the year. He said, this is all caps. He's yelling at us. That would be the dumbest thing I ever heard. Play the bowl games at the end of the year. End of story. You don't want to watch them, then don't watch. And, like with gambling, someone's going to be attached to it no matter what. And I think that's really what keeps most of these bowl games going is the gambling allure these days.
Absolutely. But like I said before too, like, okay, you want to have them at the end of the year. What about when you don't have enough programs that will even commit to playing in a bowl game?
Yeah. And again, we're talking about if the college football playoff expands, I think it's going to just completely make so many of these games even more irrelevant than they already are. Right.
And look, do you think Jalen Smith thinks they should play bowl games after the season? Like a lot of these guys that aren't going to play anymore.
He says he'd still do it again.
Oh, sure he will. But how many people are sitting out these end of the year bowl games now? A lot. It's not every team, but a lot of the teams won't go. A lot of the players, the star players won't play. So you're losing product, the good product. You're losing, even if it was a decent matchup, if the top 2 quarterbacks are out or don't want to play and Kenny Pickett's out because he doesn't want to risk injury heading into the draft, you're not actually going to see that Pittsburgh team play in the bowl game. And then what do you make of it? And then where's the gambling go after that?
Good question. Low blow, Bobby. Real quick, Field of Dreams games. Are you in or are you out? Like, do we need them at all anymore? Like, was once enough?
I'm out. What I do like is the idea of a game every year in some different stadium, like the Winter Classic in the NHL.
Yeah.
Something like that.
That's what baseball is trying to do with this. Yeah.
But then you don't need to repeat venues.
Yeah.
So I'm out. And as a White Sox fan, I don't think you're going to be able to top the game they had last year. Like if last year's game sucked or there was a little bit of problem or like just some of the procedures didn't work and then they did it again this year to show that they can put on a good game. Yeah. But I thought last year's game was phenomenal and let's go somewhere else if you want to play it.
Yeah, I mean, it was really cool last year because we had never seen that kind of thing before, and the entrances and all that stuff. And, let's be honest, you had Joe Buck attached to it as well. And, I think that he was a big part of that production that they did last year. But, then the players coming in from it was just really cool. I just don't think you're going to be able to keep that kind of interest year after year. I think it's more a one-off thing. Maybe you do it, every other year or every 3 years or something like that. I just, especially when you've got two bad teams playing in it this year.
It's not even that they're bad, because like last year, if the Yankees and the White Sox were both bad, it still would have been a novelty to watch, because those are the two teams that are kind of based on the movie, or based, in the movie. The fact that it's the Reds randomly and the Cubs, there's no storyline. It has no allure. It has no pull to me. It's like watching a postseason college football bowl game. It's just, I don't see why I would want to tune in to watch two teams that have no tie to the site or anything.
Right. Fill in the blank. It's blank. The Baltimore Ravens have won 21 consecutive preseason games.
That's shocking. It's just, well, one, it's shocking that there's a stat for that, because I know that wins matter, but my God, they've had 21. Like, do they try a little bit harder on purpose in the preseason just to get those wins?
Seems
I
like
think it's shocking to see.
Or the other team is just not trying at all.
Right. Well, either
21 consecutive games.
21. That's if you flip a coin 21 times, which is what a preseason game is, it'll never go that way. So I think it's shocking and kind of impressive, to be honest. It doesn't mean anything, doesn't mean crap, but it's still kind of cool to hear.
Yeah, that's it. It's totally irrelevant. It's like,
give them Hard Knocks and then see how many preseason games they win.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. How many did you watch Hard Knocks the other night with the Lions?
No, I didn't realize it started already.
Yep, started Tuesday night. You'll have to watch it, and we'll see if we can. Dan Campbell, I don't know, man. There's some things I like about that guy, but I'm just not sure how stable he is. Well, I love the fact that Vince and I were talking about it yesterday. He was out there, start of practice, very first practice. He and Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator, 40 up downs with the defense at the start of practice to start off training camp. And it was like they weren't like lingering up downs. It was like less than 2 minutes.
Aggressive.
40 up downs. Yeah.
Do you think that's how they start practices when Hard Knocks isn't around?
There was a lot of stuff in that show that made me think, if the cameras weren't there, ...
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and the Hard Knocks thing in general, we can talk about that next week, so we'll have plenty of time, but it's just because we're football thirsty. Because as soon as the preseason even really starts, I don't watch it as religiously.
It's still fun. I always look forward to seeing the first couple episodes of Hard Knocks and seeing where they can go. The storylines? Yeah, we'll see where it goes this year. I think that Dan Campbell is gonna find a way to kind of make things entertaining.
Be a star.
As camp goes on. Yeah.
But did you watch the Colts one last year midseason?
I tried.
That's what I mean.
It was just not interesting. They did a promo during the Lions premiere the other night. The Cardinals are going to be the mid-season team this year. It's like, okay. All right.
Well, if Kyler Murray's still there, he's still playing halfway.
He's got the contract.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
There are a lot of reports out of New England Patriots training camp. I'm talking with my hand again, that Mac Jones is struggling, and they're playing tonight. He's probably not going to play, but do you buy or sell that as a big deal?
Completely sell. I sell everything in the preseason. I sell every practice. I think I've made that pretty clear. I don't like spring practice. I don't like spring training. I don't like all this preseason stuff. You can't tell. It's like a lot of the Chicago Bears Twitter that I see. They're all making Justin Fields look like he can't throw a ball, but then they won't show if he does something right. All of it's just crap. Especially when you're playing against a defense that knows the offense and the offense knows the defense, and that you're running drills pretty much. I don't put a lot of stock in it. The guy was good last year in the NFL. You got to believe that he's going to continue to be at least productive. Maybe not a superstar yet, but just because if one game he comes out and throws for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns week 1, does anybody even remember that we were talking about his preseason?
Yeah, it's preseason, and the guy had a solid rookie year. I know a lot of people were down on him last year, Mac Jones. But, the other thing as well is his offensive coordinator last year, Josh McDaniel, is the head coach in Las Vegas right now. And I think he took like most of the offensive staff with him, so like everyone who worked with Mac Jones last year is in Las Vegas right now. So I'm sure, there's kind of a breaking in period for everybody, kind of, figuring each other out a little bit. I mean, it's Bill Parcells at the end of the day. There's a reason he drafted this guy. There's a reason, again, was he awesome as a rookie? No, but he was a rookie quarterback. And, like you look at what he did as a rookie quarterback, it wasn't that bad. So there are going to be some growing pains along the way. And the fact that tonight is their first preseason game, they haven't even played a preseason game. And we're New England, I think part of this is New England media, because they're so used to all this winning that they do out there that, they're going to jump all over this guy because maybe he's thrown a couple bad passes in training camp. So I don't think there's anything to it at all right now.
No, he had a good year last year, and people don't just fall off. And he had a pretty good year with not a whole lot of marquee weapons around him. So I don't think you can judge him or the way he runs the offense based on some practices and some scrimmages or some throws here and there. I mean, we've all had good days and bad days anyway, so I don't put any stock in any of it. How about the opposite? If he had a great look and everybody has, would you rather have those high expectations like Freeman and Notre Dame and going into the season? So he's under promising, so now he can overperform.
There you go, baby. You're right on it. All right, well, that's going to do it for tonight and for the week, for that matter, for this show. We will be back on Monday. We've got a little bit more practice tomorrow. We'll get to talk to defensive line coach Al Washington and some defensive linemen after practice. Saturday, we'll get to talk to Marcus Freeman a little bit, get some of his thoughts on how camp is going so far. And, for that matter, then Monday's going to roll around. And let me check my calendar here.
By the way, go Dolphins. I love that comment.
We'll get to talk to Chancey Stuckey next week, but we won't have practice to go to on Friday, so we'll just have the interview portion. But we'll have plenty on Monday's show to be talking about as Notre Dame training camp continues. And I'll talk to you next week, Bobby Hensley.
Can't wait.
All right. Remember, like, subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff helps out the Irish Breakdown channels. I don't know what you're laughing about.
That's the comment that already called it out. Hit like,
subscribe to the notification. There you go. Boom. He knew what I was going to say before I said it. Boom.
Yeah.
And with that, we'll talk to you next week.